Hello everybody, so today we're going to return to what we were talking about in our last video on the elements of music from chapter 2 of your textbook. In this video, I'm not going to go as in-depth on song analysis as I did the other day. I'm just going to run through all the terms, make sure I get some of that terminology, kind of review it and define some things. So let's start again with melody. A melody can be thought of kind of like a sentence in music, sort of a statement. Now, a couple of different things to know when we talk about melody. First of all, we describe pitches going higher or up and pitches going down or lower. And that's kind of arbitrary, but that's how we describe them. So pitches that are low in frequency are considered low on the instrument or in a vocal range, and high on the instrument account for pitches that are high in frequency. Okay. Another thing to talk about when it comes to melody, we talked about this a little bit the other day. Are we doing conjunct or disjunct motion? So conjunct is when our notes are real close together. We're moving stepwise, so we're just stepping from one note to the next. Or we have disjunct melodies. So these melodies are leaping around. Another way to describe the sort of space in between the notes is intervals. So instead of stepping, a disjunct melody is leaping or skipping. And that would mean having greater intervals between the notes. So I mentioned at the beginning of this that we would call a melody a sentence or compare it to a sentence. And so we can kind of think of the same way that a sentence has punctuation and points of stop and rest. And in music we call that a phrase. So if I play something, we would think of that as a complete phrase or a complete sentence. An idea has been expressed. If I stopped in the middle of that, doesn't really sound finished, does it? Now there's a couple reasons for that. Every single note in a melody has a particular job to play based on where it falls in a scale. Now we're not really going to get too far in to all of the specific jobs that every note plays, but what I do want to do is contextualize them into scales. So a scale is a collection of notes, usually in Western music 7. And if I take, for example, on my piano here, and I play from C all the way up one octave to the next C, I'm going to get a major scale, and I'm going to skip all the black keys. I'm only going to play white keys. So every single note in that major scale has a particular job to play. There's notes that sort of want to go to other notes. We talk about the 7th note of the scale wanting to go to the top note of the scale. Like that. Again, we're not going to get too deep into that for the purpose of this course, but that is one thing to bear in mind, that when you hear sort of a completed thought in a melody, we would call that a phrase. Now, major scales have a particular character. We tend to think of music written in using major scales as sounding bright, maybe happy, vigorous. These are sort of adjectives and descriptors that we can put on it. And of course, these are kind of, as we talked about with some of the stuff we looked at the other day, they're culturally constructed, and they don't always apply. But frequently, these are kind of what we hear when we hear major key music. Sounds, kind of bright forward. We can alter some of the scale degrees. So now I'm going to use the black keys a little bit. I'm going to lower the 3rd scale degree, the 6th, and the 7th. Sometimes the 7th. Sometimes we won't lower the 7th. Or if I don't lower the 7th, now we have a minor scale. So it's a different mode. And it has a different character. It's a different collection of notes that's going to give us a different melodic character. Just for the fun of it, I'm going to play what I played before in minor. sound like the same music at all. So we tend to associate minor scale music or minor key music with maybe sadness or drama. A couple other characteristics of melody. Melodies that descend, especially if they're in minor, often represent a sort of forlornness. There's a tendency in a lot of Baroque music to represent crying, like that. Or we can think of melodies going upward, especially if they're in a major key, but not necessarily, as being maybe victorious, something like that. Another element that I'd like to get into a little bit deeper is rhythm. The first term that we're going to associate with rhythm is the word beat. Beat is simply what you tap your foot to. So, like that, a steady pulse. If you're listening to music and you're dancing, that's where you're going to move. If you're clapping along, you're going to clap a steady pulse like that. That's the beat or the pulse. You can use either one of those words as a good descriptor for that. Now we organize beats into different groups called measures or bars, where some beats are going to be more important than others. So think about our description of Amazing Grace the other day, when we talked about the meter of it, where we had some strong and weak beats. Weak, strong, 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 weak, strong, right? And if we were to count those out, we can think of the strong beats as 1. We have a pickup to get us into it, so pick up 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So we get a strong beat every 3 beats. So that would be every measure in this case, because the measure divides up our strong and weak beats. And the last element of rhythm that we need to discuss is a word called tempo. Now, tempo literally means time, and that just tells us how fast or slow we're going to play. So there's kind of a utilitarian element of this. In Amazing Grace, for example, if you think about where it would most often be sung, it's a church hymn. So we don't want to sing so fast or so slow that the congregation can't sing along comfortably. It's about a comfortable singing tempo. If I went too fast, the congregation might have a hard time getting all of the words in. If at the same time, if I go too slow, people are going to start to run out of breath, so that doesn't really work either. So, there's a lot of words that we can use to describe tempo, but 3 that I think that you should go ahead and learn right away are adagio, which describes a slow tempo, andante, which literally means walking tempo, but it's kind of a moderate tempo, about where I played Amazing Grace the first time. I would describe that as andante, or a walking tempo. About 100 beats per minute is the pace that people walk at, if you're curious, typically. So, just a little interesting note there. But that actually can be kind of a useful guide. And allegro, or lively, that's going to be a faster tempo. So those 3 terms, adagio, andante, and allegro, would be good descriptors to go ahead and get used to. Looking at harmony, a couple of ways that we can describe harmony, or when 2 or more notes are played together. Probably the first thing that we want to really focus on is types of harmonies, consonant and dissonant. And the best way to get a feel for that is just to listen to them. Those 2 notes sound really nice together. What about these? It's kind of a sharpness to that. It wouldn't work great if I accompanied with that. So for example, if I take a melody and I accompany it with consonant intervals, those 2 sound really nice together. Not so much if I use dissonant intervals. They don't really work nicely together in parallel like that. So, when we combine consonant and dissonant harmonies in a piece of music, that's going to give us a sense of tension and release. So, listen to a really dissonant harmony followed by a consonant harmony. Feel that sense of release when we land on the consonant harmony after the tense dissonant harmony? That idea of tension and release is really important for musical progression, the way that music works through melodic phrases and also works through the form. A chord is a collection usually of 3 or more notes. And chords are great for accompanying melodies. Chords can have consonant or dissonant characters, and they can contribute to that sense of tension and release. Okay, we talked pretty extensively about timbre in the last video, but timbre is the color of a sound that we hear. Individual instruments have a timbre, it's the way that they sound. We can describe vocal qualities, for example. We could say something is clear or something is nasally. Sometimes it can be hard to find descriptive words for timbre, so let's talk about a few of those. A few good descriptive words for timbre might be harsh or smooth. It could be nasally or pure. It could be bright is a good one. Dark, warm. Words like that will help you describe the timbre of an instrument. Use your ear. Listen carefully. Okay, and while we're on the subject of describing these sounds, dynamic markings are another important aspect of describing music. So, typically we use Italian terms for dynamics, same as for tempo, by the way. And the two that I want you to really get comfortable with are the word forte, meaning strong or loud, and piano, which means soft. Just a little interesting aside, the history of the piano. It was actually the first instrument with a keyboard, so laid out like this where you could play it the way that I'm playing it now, where you could do this. You could play really loud or really soft depending on how much pressure you put into the key, so they called it a forte piano, meaning soft loud, or loud soft, I guess. So that's where that origin, and we dropped the forte and we just call it a piano now, but that's where that comes from. So those two words will help you describe whether the music you hear is loud or soft. Okay, texture is a really important one. So, a lot of times it's difficult to describe texture, to really know what you're hearing going on. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips for that. The word monophony or monophonic refers to one voice, no accompaniment. All you hear is that one voice, or maybe multiple voices on one melody. You can think of 4 or 5 people singing the same melody, still monophonic, because nobody's singing other notes. An example of that might be a Gregorian chant. Polyphony is when more than one singer or instrumentalist, or sometimes in the case of a lot of piano music, you might have one person doing multiple melodies at the same time. So that might be the case in like a fugue or something like that. So polyphony or polyphonic music is multiple melodies happening simultaneously. A lot of good polyphonic music comes out of the Baroque, so you can think of a Bach fugue would be a good place to start listening to polyphonic music. A lot of Renaissance choral music is polyphonic. Now homophony is a little bit different. We have one melody but with accompaniment. So remember when we looked at Amazing Grace last week? I'm just playing chords and melody. The chords are accompanying the melody, they are subordinate to the melody. The difference between homophony and polyphony is that in polyphony, multiple melodies are co-equal. In homophonic music, the chords are subordinate to one melody. Heterophony. Heterophony occurs when you have multiple people singing the same melody, but they sort of improvise and tweak it as they go. Very common in spirituals. Finally, biphony. What is biphony? Literally it means 2 voices, but most often it's going to be a melody over a drone. So you can think of a bagpipe. I'll give you a drone for Amazing Grace. See how I'm supporting that melody with that one low bass note? That's how a lot of instruments like bagpipes work. They play that one low drone note and you play the melody over it. Okay, finally I'd like to revisit form. Now, I think I gave a pretty extensive definition and discussion of form the other day, so I'm not going to spend too long on this one. Um, if you're feeling uncomfortable with it, remember the description I gave of song form, the verse, chorus, bridge, etc. Go back and watch that if you need to. But I want to talk really quickly, just run through one more song and look at the form of it. So remember, for form, we're looking at repetition and contrast. So I'm going to play through a song really quickly that you might know. And it's a 32 bar song, or 32 measures. And we're going to look at the form of it. So. Okay, so let's talk about what we heard a little bit. So I played Fly Me to the Moon, which is a kind of jazz standard, pop standard, pretty popular song for quite some time. Now, the first thing I want to address is actually there's something interesting that I played here called a walking bass line with my left hand. Now, a walking bass line is very common in a jazz performance, but it's interesting because I think the texture of this I would describe as homophonic, because it is one main melody that you'd go away singing, but that bass line is it's not quite co-equal with the melody, but it's pretty close. And so if you said polyphonic on that, I would take it. I think you could make an argument that it's polyphonic. Okay, but going back to the form of it, we heard that melody. Then we heard all right, so that's our first statement of these two phrases together. That's our first section of the melody. Then we do something a little different. All right, so we have that second melody that comes in after that. Then, what do we do after that? We go back to the first melody. Back to that second melody. So we go back and forth between the two. So if we really were to outline this, we hear the first melody, then the second melody, then the first melody, then the second melody. A, B, A, B. That's how we would describe that. So I'm going to play through it again really quickly, just the melody, and I'm going to highlight where we change sections. So, A. B. A. Going back to A now. B. A little bit different. That's it. A, B, A, B. 4 sections. Now, another thing, just as an aside for you to be aware of regarding jazz music, is what I just played, that 32 bar melody. It's what jazz musicians would call the head of the tune. That's the part that everybody knows. But you might have heard that jazz music is big on improvisation. So after we've gone through the head, what then is going to happen is different musicians in the ensemble, or if it's a solo, if it's just a solo performance like I just did, then the soloist is going to go back through that form, those 32 bars, same chords and everything, and play a solo. So I'm going to get to the end of the melody, and then I turn around, Back to the head, I'm going to play my solo now. Same musical material, but instead of playing the melody, I'm going to improvise something. So that's just an important little aside. I think that's good to know. When you're listening to jazz music, a lot of people are a little bit confused coming into jazz music. How do I listen to it? Listen for the head. Listen for solos. They're going to be going through the same form they just went through, the same chords they just went through, but they'll be playing improvised melodies. Okay, hope this helps. Please let me know if you have any questions. I just wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into all of these different elements of music that we've talked about. So, thank you very much.